Hey guys, this is Echo Soundworks and you are checking out another tutorial for ADSRsounds.com. So in this video, this is a follow-up to a tutorial I did over a year ago, which I cannot believe. And this is a kind of an accompanying video tutorial for my new sound set, EDM Drops Volume 2. I did a similar style video tutorial when EDM Drops 1 came out, but this one's going to be a slightly different format. Instead of focusing on massive or synth preset, this is going to be more of a mixing tips and tricks or mixing techniques video. So quick little disclaimer, these are by no means the de facto you must do type mixing techniques if you're trying to mix a drop for EDM. It's just some of my favorite personal things that I like to do to get my mixes to sound better and bigger, and they're pretty easy to do. So I thought I would kind of consolidate them into a fairly hopefully short video tutorial if I don't ramble on too much. So there's a few reasons actually why I chose this demo. This is part of a demo from EDM Drops Volume 2. It's because it has 3 distinct sections, right? Now, if this were expanded into a full track, it would be a lot longer, obviously, and it'd be harder to kind of move to and from each section for this tutorial. So it's nice that this has an intro/verse section right here, which we heard. This would probably be like the breakdown section, and this would be your drop. All right, so these tips and tricks that we're going to talk about will work for tons of genres of quote EDM. It'll work for like future house, deep house, main room, big room, complextro, electro, anything that has a monophonic lead style or even bass style drop, where that's the focus of your drop section. All right, so before we actually talk about the individual elements that you can apply to the main bass sound or lead sound in your drop, it's helpful to note that I could probably spend a whole tutorial on how to kind of mix into your drop to make the right decisions with your mixing process, because mixing is just a lot of decision making. And so I will touch on one element. If you don't have a good transition into your drop, the drop's never gonna sound big. So remember this, the ear is pretty stupid. It doesn't have a memory. It can't really remember what went on 3 seconds ago as it's taking in more sound, right? It's not its own brain. It's transmitting sound waves to our brain, essentially. So that being said, your transitions become very important. That's why we do things like whoosh, 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 and all that silly stuff, because it basically gets the ear ready for change and also helps the ear to forget. So before we get into the meat of this tutorial, I just want to spend another hopefully a short minute or so talking about the transition. This section right here, this pre-drop section, is a 4-chord progression. Each chord is getting 8 counts, it looks like. So you can see here on this last little part leading into my fill and then leading into the drop that I have cut out the last half of that chord, or the last 4 counts, and just left the melody. So let's listen to that. All right, so what happens, 2 things. My ear is going to forget how loud it was because the sound is, dying out because I took away these chords in the bass. So I'm losing probably, I would say, about 4 to 5 decibels of sound. And just as a little random statistic, the average listener can discern between a decibel change. So 4 decibels is a lot, right? Now, I have some limiting going on in my mix, so let's actually listen to this. So because of the limiting, it's going to say it's around, it's going to be peaking at about 0. But if we listen to how much gain we're getting from the bass and the 2 chord sounds, that's peaking at about -3, -2.8. So taking all that out is a big change for the ear. So it's getting loud, it's getting quieter, and there's space because of the drum fill. So now my ear is forgetting not only the frequencies, it's kind of past the whole synth sound. I could change this into any drop style I want. I could have strings or whatever. And because of this drop where I've cut out the frequencies, I've reduced the volume, and I have the space with the drum fill, my ear is pretty much going to be okay with anything it hears, and it's also going to make it easier for it to be a really big sound because I'm coming from a quieter section. So this sound this section sounds like it gets bigger. It does, but it doesn't get that much bigger. It's because it's coming out of this area of space. All right, let's actually get into what you can do to improve your drop sounds and make them sound bigger. So I actually got a couple questions on the EDM Drops Volume 2 demo where people were asking, what do I do to the sounds to get them to sound like the demo? And it's not much. And it's basically just these 2 or 3 things that I will do. I try to stay in the synth as much as possible because I am a firm believer in if you are using a less than great source sound, whether it's a sample or a synth preset, you need to start with a good source material. Otherwise, you're basically polishing a turd, and that never goes well. So let's dissect the elements in this section. We have the kick and that synth layered. We have a kind of a future house, deep house synth. It's called bass raw, future drop, layered with that to give it its own little flavor. Now these pink and blue tracks down here are the actual main synth sounds. So I don't have any processing going on those. I used a really good kick sample that was already probably super processed. And layered that with a synth and had some sidechain compression on that synth. So I don't have to do a whole lot to that. So this pink lead right here, this first one, it's a silent patch. Sounds like that. Second lead here is a massive patch, and this is the main sound in the drop. It's called hash. And then these 2 are some weird silent patches out left and right with a lot of processing. So let's talk about the first thing that you can do to improve your drops. The first thing is to do layering or to use layering techniques with your synths. So I could again probably spend a whole tutorial on layering, and I actually have, and I will sum it up like this. You don't want to choose a sound to layer with your main lead or bass or whatever it may be that is so similar that it's basically like, why am I layering this? Otherwise it turns into a double. A layer is not a double, right? A layering is like an orchestra where you have a cello, a viola, a violinist. You have all those different things happening to make a thick sound. You don't just have, well, they do, but you don't just stack on more of the same instrument. The ear basically just hears that as louder. So don't choose a sound that is so similar that it's basically just a double, and do not choose a sound that is typically so dissimilar that the ear is going to really easily pick up on it being 2 very distinct sound sources. So this is a good example right here. This silent patch is used making 2 oscillators that are using a white noise, essentially. And I have a square / H pulse wave and a saw wave. So there is an element of a square sound to this patch. It's blended with a saw, but there is the square in there, or the H pulse. And this hash sound coming from massive is all basically saw or the pulse width, the virtual analog pulse width modulation. So those layer nicely because they fit that criteria of it's not too similar and it's not too dissimilar. So they layer together. Now this last lead right here, this is a combo of a noise oscillator and a triangle saw. So again, it's similar, but it has that dissimilar element. But I'm also processing out left and right in the stereo field, and I'm pretty much squashing the heck out of it with some sidechain compression. So those layered together, I'll solo them. As opposed to just that lead hash from Massive. So technique number 1, layer your sounds, but make sure you're doing it right. All right, now the second thing that you can do, and I love using this trick for main room and synth sounds, is to do some mid-side equalization and to do some creative boosts with your EQ. I feel like a lot of people, I myself included, have been taught that boosting EQ is bad and that doing cuts is better. While I'll typically agree, sometimes it's actually really beneficial to do some boosts, but you have to do them in a way that corresponds to what the human ear is going to hear. So that being said, I know that the human ear is better at hearing high frequency and mid frequency than low frequency, we can hear much more subtle changes to high frequency and mid frequency than we can low frequency. So with this main sound here, this hash, because this is the bulk of my drop, I have done two things in one. I have applied some mid-side EQ. So to do that in Logic, you'll have to load up two different equalizers on the same channel, and then choose the processing to mid only on one, and then to side on the other, and then you'll have mid-side processing. What this allows you to do is I'm taking out the low frequencies of the mid-range in the middle of the stereo field, and I'm taking out some of the highs, the high frequencies as well, in the whole middle section. So it's opening up and leaving space for my kick and drop. Well, then on the side content, what I'm doing is I have done a really crazy boost, right? Like this looks different than most EQ tutorials would tell you. Most of them would say that this type of boost would be bad. But this is just the left and right content. I'm not doing it to the middle of the sound because it's mid-side processing. Now, the reason why I boosted at 3,250 hertz is the human ear is really good at hearing this mid-range. It's where speech is generally located, and it's very fine-tuned to this. So let's listen to this sound with this EQ on and off. So if I turn this gain up much more, it would start to get annoying because we're very sensitive in this range, and to a lesser degree this high frequency as well, up to about 5 to 10K. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of saying, okay, I want this sound to basically get to the point where it's maybe 25, 30% under where it would be annoying, because then it's going to make it jump out of the mix. Again, this is only the left and right content. It's not the middle of my mix. The middle of the mix is the sacred part of your mix, so it's not going to, screw that part up. And there's so much happening in the middle. This is happening in the stereo, because it is a stereo sound. I have my bass and my kick, so it's not like this boost is going to completely destroy your mix. It's going to help make this sound pop out. All right, so I've applied those EQ edits to all of the sounds in my layer. You can see here that I'm boosting at about 4,500 here, and I'm doing that to the mid only. Now, the reason why I'm only doing this to the mid only on the silent track is because it's just not as loud in my mix, and it's just not as important, but I'm also boosting it, so it's not a huge change. The bulk of the sound's happening at 500 because of the white noise. So I could even cut a little bit of that to clean things up. But anyway, I've applied similar EQ techniques to the other sounds. I've cut the lows to leave room for my bass sound, and I've boosted the highs. So let's jump into the next technique outside of those EQs. And this one I like to do a lot. So instead of throwing on or creating a ghost track and creating a compressor tied to a kick to create my sidechain, if you guys watched my tutorials, you know I love the LFO tool. Well, I also really like using it on an aux send. So I'm basically doing parallel sidechain compression, I guess. So let's listen to this on the lead hash. All right, let's solo the LFO tool. So I just set that up on an aux send. There's two reasons why I like using the aux send is I get to control what's happening and kind of control the blend between the dry signal and the sidechain signal a little bit better. I also get a more musical result to my ear where I don't get that nasty pumping effect that sucks all the life out of my mix. So I have applied that on every track or every synth layer in this drop. It's my bus 1, and you can see that happening here on every track, right? So all 4 of them. And it creates this image where you hear the main sound, but it's also sidechain compressed. All right, now the next tip or trick that I want to talk about for filling out your drop sections, and you can use this for any genre of EDM, is a tempo synced reverb that is then sidechain compressed. So let's listen to this bus. All right, so admittedly, in isolation, when I stereo it, it sounds really stupid. It just sounds like a wash of frequencies. But let's actually look at what's happening to see why it fits into a mix nicely. Now I have an instance of the Vengeance reverb up, and there's this nice function in this reverb plugin that allows you to tempo sync your pre-delay. So on this aux send or this bus, what I've done is I've loaded up the reverb, I cranked the mix up to 100%, and I have synced my pre-delay to an eighth note. So what that means is there's going to be an eighth note duration or time elapsing before the reverb signal kicks in. So what that does is it allows the center part of my mix and this main section of my lead sound, and I have applied this to every lead in my drop, all the layers, is it allows it to stay very focused and present. Remember, reverb can suck things into the back of the mix. It's a three-dimensional tool that we use. But I don't want that happening too much here because I need this part of this sound, I need this part of the mix to be present. All right, so to take this a step further, I have loaded up a instance of the LFO tool, so I'm sidechain compressing this tempo synced reverb, and I have it set to a really low level of sidechain compression. It just adds this cool bounce that I like, and I have, again, that is happening on this third bus that you'll see that's on every sound, so it really helps fill out the mix. Now, with a sound like maybe a future house or deep house, I wouldn't throw on as much reverb. It'd be a shorter reverb, but these are all things you can do with multiple genres of EDM. Now, the final little thing that I have applied to a couple of the sounds, I have some delay occurring. Let's solo that. So just a little bit of stereo delay just to help fill out that mix. But again, the main things that are happening with these sounds are I have done some creative equalization cuts. So the main things that I've done to fill out this drop, there's 3 of them. I have layered around my main sound. I decided that this lead hash from Massive was going to be my main sound, and then I layered 2 other synth sounds together to kind of make that sound better and bigger. And then I did these creative EQ edits or cuts and boosts using both mid-side EQ and just normal equalization to really get some frequencies to pop out at the human ear and out in the mix. And then the third thing that I did that really helped fill this mix out was sending an aux send of both 2 aux sends. That one is a sidechain compression where I can then blend between the dry and wet signal, and also that tempo synced reverb, kind of creating that reverb delay effect that's also being sidechain compressed. Add all that together, and this drop gets very big. So I'll A/B that real quick. So here's with everything on. And we will listen to all of it off. I mean, it sounds all right. That's just because I'm using good sounds. I'm using good presets. I'm using, not to toot my own horn, but I'm using quality presets, and I've started out with a good drum sample and all that. So what happens is I'm just trying to improve the mix. I'm not polishing a turd. I'm just trying to make everything better and bigger. All right, guys. If you guys haven't checked out the demo or the video for EDM Drops Volume 2 and you want to support that, I would greatly appreciate that. If not, I hope you guys really got some cool tips and tricks from this tutorial, regardless of what genre you are into. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.